How's it going, everybody? It's Malarax, and today I want to talk about the UFC and what I think is going to happen to the UFC in the future. First things first, I kind of just want to say that I know what I'm talking about, but also at the same time, nobody really knows what they're talking about. Ever since the sport came out, people have been debating who's the greatest and who's the worst, and honestly, I don't think anybody will come to like a general consensus until it's all over and said and done. That being said, I do have my preferences. My favorite fighter is Charles Oliveira, but the person I think is the greatest fighter is George St. Pierre. But the topic I want to focus on for this video is just what's going on with the UFC and what I think about all the current champions. Now, everybody's saying that the UFC is kind of going downhill, and I disagree, but I think they're doing things that I just do not agree with at all. They're making Islam and Topuria vacate their belts because, they're going up a division. With Topuria, I kind of understand because he said he's not going to go back to 145, so I understand vacating that belt. But Islam, I'm pretty sure he's going to come back to 155 at some point, so I don't really see like a reason to vacate him. And when Topuria goes 155, I'm praying that he loses and Oliveira becomes champion again, Call me delusional, but that is what I want. But on to the current champions and what I think about them. So we have the flyweight champion, which is Pantoja, and I don't love Pantoja, but I don't hate him, I understand what he's done. He's cleared out his entire division, and there's no real prospects for him to fight. Everyone that he's going against that's in title contention, he's already beat at least once, so he has kind of cleared everybody. And regarding him fighting Demetrius Johnson, I think that was, it made him look bad, because Pantoja is calling out a legend. The legend said, nah, I'm good. And then, now he's just sitting there with his cock out, just alone, that was kind of a lame thing for him to do. Aside from all that, I think Pantoja is a good champion, but I just think he's not interesting enough to be like a world-class one. And what I mean by world-class doesn't mean like he's like not good. I understand he's like really, really, really good. But I think he's just kind of like just a nobody who is a champion, and I don't think he'll ever be a superstar in the sport, because I think Pantoja is just not a very interesting champion. Now, on to bantamweight, we got Merab Dvalishvili. I think that's how you say his last name, but I kind of like Merab, he's starting to grow on me. And I watched the fight with Umar again. When I watched it live, I thought Umar probably won 3 rounds, but looking back at it, it's a lot closer than what I thought. And honestly, I still don't really know, but I think, I'm starting to lean a little bit more towards Merab. And as for him being a champion, I think he's entertaining enough for the fans of UFC to be world class, as in popular. But no regular person can look at Merab and how he acts and just be like, that's a guy who I'm interested in watching, Because when I first saw Merab fight, I was like, he's just a little fucking goblin, and now he's fighting Sean O'Malley. And Sean O'Malley getting a rematch after doing nothing but Merab having one more title defense is kind of crazy to me. It's like Merab had to get another fight to rematch somebody he already beat. I think Sean O'Malley should have at least fought and beat somebody in a spectacular fashion just one more time before he got a title shot. Now on to the featherweight division, we have Volkanovski, which, we all know Volkanovski as a champion. I probably haven't been conscious enough to not know him as a champion. And of course, I witnessed what Ilia Topuria did to him. But aside from that, we've always, known Volkanovski is a champion. But seeing him as a champion again is, it's kind of the same old, same old. I think having Diego Lopez be a champion could have definitely spiced up the division, because Volkanovski has already shut down a lot of people in that division. And the people who he hasn't, they're not really climbing towards the top as fast as they should be. That one molester Evov person, I don't know how to say his name, but he's getting an unranked fighter for his next fight, right? And then Yair Rodriguez is getting another title shot, which I think is kind of crazy. And I love Volkanovski. I didn't mean any of this to hate on him, but what I meant by all that was it would be refreshing to see a new champion face kind of older opponents instead of seeing Volkanovski go through the ringer again. And what I meant by I haven't been conscious long enough to see Volkanovski not be a champion is that he was a champion for so long that he quite literally went through everybody, almost like Pantoja did. But seeing how old Volk is, I'm wondering how many fights he's really going to go through before he retires. Is he going to retire after his next loss, or is he going to retire after his next fight? Because it has to be soon. He's pushing 40. But on to the next division, we have probably the most stacked division of the UFC there is, which is the lightweight division. Now, before I give my opinions on the champion, I would like to address that there is something major coming for the lightweight division. I'm going to call it a great recession, because all of our favorite fighters are about to retire within 1 to 2 years. Everybody is pushing 40, and it's sad to see, but everybody we know will retire very, very soon. But on to the champion, I guess until Topuria and Oliveira fight, Islam is still the champion. And I don't hate Islam. I think he's a pretty good champion. And there is a fair case to say that he could possibly be ducking Topuria, but that's kind of controversial. I think Islam as a champion cleared out a lot of top contenders in his division, enough to where we can say, okay, you kind of do deserve to go up, even though you haven't fought this massive threat coming your way. But I think as a champion, he won the belt from a vacated belt because Charles missed weight, which I know there was a story connected to that something like wasn't right. But anyways, he got it because the belt was vacated. Then he beat Volkanovski twice, then he beat Oliveira, then he beat Dustin, then he beat Moicano. And, those are all good wins, but I think if he did choose to fight Topuria and beat him, he would cement himself as probably the greatest fighter ever. But instead, he decided to go up a division and take a much, much easier fight. But in terms of superstardom, I think Islam has the chance to be like a pretty popular person even outside of MMA. But then again, Khabib kind of started the whole Russian thing, and nobody really cared since Khabib. And Islam going up to welterweight to fight for the belt, is interesting, I guess, because he was kind of preying on the downfall of his friend. Because Bilal was the reason Islam didn't go up before, because they were friends. But then Islam said he prayed to God that he'd get the opportunity to become like a double champion, but the only way that would happen is if he prayed for his friend to lose. So he did kind of pray for his friend's downfall, but I guess it makes sense in some way. Moving on to welterweight, we have Jack Della Maddalena, which I think his name is super fucking cool, but I think him as a champion just ain't it. Now don't get me wrong, I would take Jack over Bilal any day of my life, but I don't really see a world where people look at Maddalena and go, this is a guy who I want to follow, and this is a guy who I want to learn more about, He just doesn't give that off. He gives off a guy who got a title shot, who, beat up a wrestler. And it's not really Jack's fault. He did win the title from a guy who was just so fucking boring. And the guy who was so fucking boring just so happened to beat up Leon Edwards. But who gives a fuck about Leon Edwards? The only thing he's ever done is knock out Kamaru Usman and ended the greatest welterweight era there was. So to begin with, he was kind of just coming off of two really boring champions, and he doesn't really spice up the champion roster as well as many other previous welterweight champions. But on to middleweight, we have Dricus du Plessis. Now, I like Dricus. I like his personality. I like basically everything about him. I think being a South African champion's pretty cool, even though he doesn't really get respected for it. He doesn't have an arena that's ever going to be put in his country. But still, Dricus is kind of a bully, he stole the belt from Sean Strickland, and then when Israel Adesanya came around, he shoved him into a locker, and then when Sean Strickland got the rematch, he kind of just beat him up and broke his nose. That is just bully behavior, nothing else really comes to mind except he's kind of bullying everybody at the top right now. And him fighting Khamzat in a few months, if that ever even fucking happens, because we all know Khamzat, we all know his tendencies to not fight people. But if that fight does end up happening, it would be just so hilarious to see him accidentally fall and his hand just so happens to be around Khamzat's neck like it was for Robert Whittaker. People say Dricus has plot armor, and I can't really disagree. Because I remember when I was watching him submit Israel Adesanya, I was thinking to myself, how the fuck did that work? He grabbed on his leg and basically pulled his pants down like he was just a fucking bully, as I said before. He pulled Israel Adesanya's pants down and then wrapped his meaty arms around his neck, and that's just kind of where the fight ended, And I was just like, what fuck happened this whole fight? Nevertheless, I do believe he can really be a superstar if any of the champions were to be the next Conor McGregor. And for light heavyweight, we have Magomedov Ankalaev. And this guy pisses me off. You know, he ended the Alex Pereira hype train, which, by the way, I watched their fight live. I was off fucking 240 milligrams of straight fucking power, and, you know, I didn't enjoy what I was watching. A lot of hugging, a lot of just bullshit, you know? Sure, he beat him, but also, you know, he will never, history will not remember him. And on to heavyweight. You know, the complicated ass situation of the heavyweight division. Jon Jones is technically the undisputed champion of the heavyweight division, but Tom Aspinall is the interim champion, and I believe he's defended his interim belt once. So him and Jon have the same amount of title defenses. There's a petition going around to strip Jon Jones of his belt, and it has roughly 102,000 signatures. And some of the people who signed that petition are known, like Dan Hooker, Tom Aspinall himself, and probably even Jon Jones. And Jon Jones has hurt his career so much by ducking the interim champion, he's probably hurt it more than it would just vacating the belt or even just losing to him. And we all know that Jon Jones ducks hard fights, okay? It's not an unknown thing. He ducked Francis Ngannou, and he basically ducked Stipe for 4 years until he was an old fucking firefighter. And I guess you could kind of call Jon Jones a superstar, but he's not very known throughout, like, households, mainly just in, like, the fighting community, which is still a massive community of people. And he also he does everything that every other celebrity does, you know? He has the crimes and he has the accomplishments. That's basically what kind of cements you as a good celebrity. And that's kind of it for the champions, and now is on to my kind of gripes with the UFC as a whole. Now, one thing I've noticed while watching the prelims is that they put fighters with like 7, 8 wins for their 9th fight. It's always their 9th fight. They put them against almost veterans. Like, I remember in one of the prelims, they had a guy who was fighting in his 9th fight go against somebody who had like 30 fights in total. And of course he lost, you know? It's like he has so much more experience. And one instance of this I can say is Peyton Talbot versus that one guy. Now, I was never a Peyton Talbot glazer, but I did kind of enjoy the fact that he used to fuck Frank Ocean. So they put all these up-and-coming guys against tougher opponents. I get that. But I feel like instead of putting them against like people who have been in the octagon 30 fucking times, I feel like if they have 9 wins and if they really want to go up the ranks, have them fight somebody with 15 fights in total, you know? Somebody who's not totally out of their skill margin, but somebody who, you know, has more experience in just the whole fighting as a sport, but not too much to where it's just simply not entertaining. And another big gripe is that the big old boss of the UFC, Dana White, is kind of not promoting his own company, you know? He's promoting boxing fights. And I think if the promotions were done right, the UFC could be a lot more popular today than what it is. Because UFC promotions, I'll be honest, most of them are kind of dog shit, you know? It's like boxing has this whole spectacle, like almost a hype trailer for a movie, while the UFC just has like a poster that they bought from DeviantArt. But that's more or less all my gripes about the UFC, and that's my opinions on all the current champions. And if you guys think of anything differently than I do, please tell me in the comments. Make sure to like this video and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.